The Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDi, is a nonprofit drug research and development organization that is developing new treatments for neglected diseases in underdeveloped countries. This organization's mission and objectives are to develop and research new medication for infectious and neglected diseases that fall outside the scope of market-driven research and development. DNDi is working diligently for the betterment of global health. DNDi's primary focus is to research and develop cost-effective drugs and has paved a new path in developing new medicine. Learn more about the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, its mission and projects with Dr. Serge Sagodira on Heart to Heart. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Serge Sagodira, the Director of Business Development at DNDi, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, which is a non-profit drug research and development organization. Hello and welcome to Heart. Thank you for joining us today. Would you like to say hello to our viewers that are watching?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the invitations. My name is Serge Sagodira. I'm Director of Business Development at Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative.
Thank you once again for the wonderful intro. I'd like to begin by talking about the DNDi. The organization began with seed funding from Doctors Without Borders. So could you tell us how and when DNDi was established?
DNDi was created in 2003, 15 years ago. It was born from frustrations of MSF field doctors who were seeing patients that they could not simply treat with safe and effective treatments and feel adapted. So based on this treatment, in 1999, MSF won a Nobel Prize, and they have dedicated funds to a working group called Drug for Neglected Disease Working Group. And a few years later, DNDi was created to solve this problem of lack of drug for neglected diseases with a very specific models that I will describe later on.
DNDi's headquarters is located in Geneva, Switzerland, with 8 offices around the globe. Now, in which parts of the world are your regional offices located, and could you tell us about their main activities?
Sure. So you listed correctly 8 offices. The role of the regional offices varies depending on where they're located. In the southern part of the globe, Brazil, Africa, India, Malaysia, these offices are very much involved in operation activities, clinical activities, research activities. Whereas New York and Tokyo, it's more for advocacy and policy, specifically in New York. And in Tokyo, it's advocacy and business development relationship with Japanese companies.
I see. So 7 founding partners joined forces to establish DNDi. Could you tell us specifically about them?
Sure. So when DNDi was created, the gap to be filled was huge for DNDi alone. And DNDi, created jointly by MSF and WHO, wanted to engage endemic countries and make them responsible for the definition of research priorities within the countries. We cannot achieve the goal in those countries without engaging the governments, and associate them in the research efforts that we're conducting in those countries. So we closely work with Minister of Health in those countries, and governments, and some research institutions.
I see. So what brings you to Korea this time around?
So, I mean, there is multiple reasons for being in Korea.
Yes.
First of all, there are 2 of scientists who have been invited to present some of our projects at the Worldwide Congress in Parasitology, which is happening as we speak in Daegu. It's called ICOPA. In addition, we would like to take the benefit of a new fund initiative that is going to be launched soon in Korea called Right Fund to give exposure to DNDi among the pharmaceutical community. We have organized an event on Monday, 27 at the Swiss Embassy, where we have invited pharmaceutical companies and research institutions to network with the DNDi team. We will present our model, we'll present the funding opportunities with the Right Fund, and we hope to get closer to pharma industry and convince some of the companies to engage with us on those programs. So it's going to be a 2 to 3 hours event at the Swiss Embassy. We are very happy that we've been able to gather almost 30 people to present ourselves, myself and some of my colleagues, and present our pipelines and our projects.
I see. So then what kind of cooperative relationship have Korea and DNDi maintained over the years?
At the moment, we have a close relationship and footprint through our collaboration with Institut Pasteur Korea. And we believe that the industry in Korea is quite strong in life science. And we hope that we could benefit from the industry expertise, access to libraries that exist in those industries, and some specific expertise that we don't access at the moment.
And how do you expect relations between Korea and DNDi to strengthen or expand during your visit this time?
Well, first is expand our network through this event. I mean, getting closer to those community. We are not really familiar at DNDi with the pharmaceutical industry, so the goal is really to get closer. We have 17 companies have accepted our invitations on Monday, so we'll be in contact with the major pharmaceutical company from Korea on Monday, and that will be the kickoff of probably a long-term relationship.
I see. So this was last year. The DNDi Project of the Year was awarded to, you just briefly mentioned, the Institut Pasteur Korea program.
Correct, yeah.
And so what did the Institut Pasteur Korea receive recognition for? I'm curious.
So the project which was awarded called the NTD Booster Project, which includes Institut Pasteur Korea, but also some pharma companies. The goal of this project is to speed up the early discovery process and identify promising candidates by using Institut Pasteur Korea expertise in screening and analysis, because they have state-of-the-art technologies which will help us to identify those technologies. That was the recognition. They have strong expertise, and we're using their platform to be able to help using libraries to which we access freely in Japan, and we work in cooperation between DNDi, Institut Pasteur Korea, and Japanese companies.
Now, before we begin to talk about the activities and achievements of the DNDi, could you tell us about the kinds of illnesses referred to as infectious diseases? What exactly are infectious diseases, and what are they? What kinds of illnesses are considered or referred to as infectious diseases?
Infectious diseases are diseases caused by microorganisms like virus, bacteria, and parasites. People get infected either directly or through a vector, specifically for parasites. Within the category of infectious diseases, there is a category of neglected diseases on which we are focusing, such as sleeping sickness, such as leishmaniasis. But there are very known infectious diseases that are like HIV, TB, malaria, which are also infectious diseases.
DNDi's primary focus has been the development of drugs for the most neglected diseases that people are suffering from, mostly in underdeveloped countries. Now, these are drugs for those diseases that many are unwilling or unable to develop. So could you also tell us about the illnesses or diseases that are in this neglected diseases category? What kinds of diseases are we talking about?
So we're talking about the diseases that are very neglected, that affect people, population living in poverty, without adequate sanitations, and living close to domestic animals or livestock, and close also to the infectious vectors. The market size is small because these diseases affect low economic countries, and it's true that it's difficult to attract for-profit companies in those diseases, but we are able to attract because we have several partners from the industry working alongside DNDi. We are working, since we have been created, we have brought up 7 treatments in the market in leishmaniasis, Chagas diseases, sleeping sickness, and pediatric HIV, and we're improving the initial drugs that we have brought to the market.
And how is the drug development coming along?
It's going, I would say, pretty well. We work in our model in partnership, and we initially started by short-term strategy by combining or improving existing drugs that we have not developed from scratch, but we at least improve formulations or dosage to bring in few years' time drugs to the patients. But since then, we have developed a drug discovery engine to be able to discover new chemical entities entirely from scratch in partnership with several players, and with the goal of bringing safer drugs, more effective and more field adapted, which could be orally administered instead of injectable.
There are neglected diseases shunned by pharmaceutical companies due to low repetition rate in developed countries, and also because of low marketability. The poor in Africa are tormented by neglected diseases. People in Congo suffer from neglected diseases. Neglected diseases in underdeveloped countries are directly linked to the survival of the citizens. The Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDi, is an organization that is striving to develop new treatment for neglected diseases. Let us learn more about DNDi. Now, one of the reasons why many pharmaceuticals or others are not developing drugs for certain diseases is because, I guess, the lack of commercial incentive. And an example is a drug you did mention briefly. It's called the African trypanosomiasis, which is also known as sleeping sickness. So could you please tell us more about this?
Well, first of all, sleeping sickness is on the list of priority of WHO and targets and eliminations towards 2030. So DNDi get engaged in sleeping sickness initially by reformulating old products. People were treated by sleeping sickness with arsenic derivatives for decades, and those drugs were very toxic, painful, even people were dying with these drugs. So it was the right time for someone to take care of these issues, and DNDi started using new combination of drugs and brought up a first treatment in the market, which is an injectable combination called NECT, but it's still injectable and a long-term treatment. Our goal is to improve this first drug, and we have been able to develop a second drug which is already administered and for 14 days of treatment course, which is a real improvement compared to the first one.
Yes.
And this drugs, which is in the process of registrations, under a specific procedure in the EMEA, and then we'll reach the endemic countries next year. However, we believe that 14 days treatment is still complicated, and we're working on a second generation of oral pill, which will be a one-day treatment. This is the way we improve also life of the patients, and also the way to achieve probably elimination.
That 14 days was a big difference. I mean, it had been shortened, and from 14 days, you're thinking just one day.
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, the Tufts University Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, they've recently announced that, on average, around $1.4 billion is invested in developing one new drug, and DNDi has broken that $1 billion mark. Now, DNDi used only 1/5 of the expenses used by pharmaceutical companies to develop 7 drugs, and treatment for sleeping sickness is one of them. So I'd like to ask, how much has the organization spent on drug development?
We cannot compare DNDi to pharmaceutical company because you're comparing apples and pears. However, we brought up a new way of doing R&D and developing drugs by working in partnership with research institutions, with government, but also with pharmaceutical companies. we have had access over the past 15 years to libraries of pharmaceutical companies freely. We didn't need to pay for that. And if DNDi would have to build a library of compounds, that would have been very expensive. We also benefit from in-kind contribution from some of the pharma companies, and they they contribute to our program. They run some activities on their own costs. So it's a way to reduce our own costs. Besides, DNDi is an entirely virtual company, organizations. We don't have any laboratories. We don't have manufacturing sites. We don't have huge cost structures. We have low overheads. We run the program from A to Z, but entirely in network with more than 160 partnerships throughout the world. And those partners could be pharmaceutical companies, biotech, CRO, and vendors. In addition, probably CRO and vendors that we're working with charge DNDi less than what they would charge for-profit companies. So we benefit from our statute of getting better price to get access to those services.
I see. There are many phases in drug development. So I'd like to ask, which of those phases requires the most expenses, and what is the cost of developing one drug?
There are many phases when it comes to develop drugs, but the most expensive phases are the clinical trials in patients, the field trials. When you're moving to healthy volunteer phase 1 to phase 2 and phase 3, you increase the cost because your treatment are longer. You need to follow up your patient on a longer time, and you need to increase the number of patients to have enough patients to prove the efficacy of the drugs. I would like to share some example of figures that DNDi is coming with for the cost of developments. As an example, the fexinidazole, which is our new sleeping sickness treatment under registrations, has cost us roughly $62 million for the full developments. It's quite a large cost, but it's still reasonable compared to what some for-profit companies can come with. Another example, which is much less expensive, but there is a reason for that, is the combination therapy that we developed for malaria and registered in 2007. AZAC cost us $14 million. But for that combination therapy, we did not discover the drugs. The drug existed separately. They were developed by others.
I see.
We did the development only of the combination therapy, hence the reduced costs.
In our clinic, we have about 1,500 kids.
Ngihlangabezana nomzima kakhulu kwilentuzana kuma-ARVs. Kumele ngimnikeze, yebo, yasetshenzwa. Kumele ngilwe naye.
You have the burden of the ARVs, then you have ritonavir, then you have TB medication, so there's a huge pill burden.
Kufanele ngivuke ngo-5. Ngimphuzise i-TB treatment. Sizovuka ngo-5 angabisalala. Kuze until 6. Kumele ngimnikeze i-treatment yama-ARVs ngo-6. Kunzima kakhulu ingane efanele uyinikeze imithi ewu-4 ngesikhathi.
I think the kids just need a simple regimen. They don't want a bag of tablets.
Mhlambe nenze nomphilisi elilodwa nje abantu abadala.
If they come up with some clever, different dosages with less amount of medication, that will work.
Now, I heard that you faced difficulties in your drug development projects. One of the difficulties you faced was while working in conflict areas and war zones for your drug treatment and drug development. Could you tell us about this?
Absolutely. In particular, we're talking about septic sickness. We run trial for septic sickness in DRC, and sometimes running clinical trials in unsafe regions or in regions where there is no roads, there is no electricity. You face a lot of challenges. You need to bring the electricity at the right place. You need to also to build sometimes the facilities. You don't necessarily find the qualified people, so you need to train them so that they can carry on the clinical trials. And one of the other issues is also to find the patients and to trace the patients, because patients in septic sickness are spread out in the countryside. They are in a remote area. Sometimes to bring the drug to a patient, you need to take a car, then a motorbike, then a boat, then you need to walk to reach that patient.
Wow.
This is the challenge that we're facing. It's more technical challenges. You also sometimes facing more funding challenges. We have a huge portfolio, we have ambitions, and we need to maintain our sustainability through finding new donors and maintain the commitment of current donors.
You just talked about delivering drugs to a patient, how you have to take a car, drive a car, and then a motorbike and walk. I mean, what distances are we talking about? How far are these locations, or how many hours away are they?
It's hours. It's 2 to 3 hours. It's several. I mean, in a modern country like here, you would reach your patient very quickly because you have roads, proper roads. There you don't have the roads, so you really need to take a bike, a motorbike, a bicycle. It's hours of travel to bring your drugs out to find the patients and to get them in a larger city.
Can DNDi's successful cases and know-how be implemented in the development of new drugs by other pharmaceutical companies?
I think it's possible. DNDi is a very specific model, but yes, it's possible. We don't want to challenge the pharmaceutical models today. What DNDi has done is to bring the best of the private sector with the best of the public sectors, and we successfully achieve some of the objectives that we set at the beginning. And we believe that there are lessons learned from what DNDi has done for NTD to use this model beyond NTDs, non-communicable diseases, for developing countries. And I'm sure that using the same model and a partnership between private and public sector, it will be possible also to bring affordable drugs for cancer or diabetes in the developing countries. We could engage pharmaceutical companies, but we have to keep in mind that a pharmaceutical company is a for-profit company and they don't take too much risk. So they probably need to work in partnership with some others or have some subsidies to be able to work both on for-profit areas but also non-for-profit areas.
And finally, could you tell us about DNDi's current and future plans or projects you're working on?
We have a lot of ambitions. We have several projects, more than 30 projects in our pipeline. One of the main projects which will make us visible in the next few years is our involvement in hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is not a neglected disease per se, but there are neglected patients in some part of the world. The drug exists, they are very effective, but quite expensive, and a lot of patients and government cannot afford those drugs. Therefore, DNDi has decided to engage in the development of a new combination for hepatitis C at an affordable price. The target price for this drug would be around $300 a treatment course, way down compared to the current drugs. And our combination therapy have proven to be efficacious so far in the trials that we are conducting in Malaysia and Thailand. When this drug will be available, that will allow us patients to access to the treatment, but also strong government initiative to treat largely their patients. Another program is a joint initiative between DNDi and WHO, is the launch of a new entity called GARP, Global Antibiotic Research Partnership, where the goal is to address the antimicrobial resistance.
Well, it was a very interesting talk we had today, and it was a time for me to learn and, I guess, think more about those suffering from diseases. We had a chance to learn about neglected diseases as well. I'd like to thank you so much for your time, for joining us today. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.